It's the holidays. What better time to send out JCPenney coupons or Kmart coupons, if Kmart's still around, via email to your grandmother, to your mother, to your spouse, to your kids, and have them click on something and it kind of hoses you up, right? Or your administrator looking for a good coupon and a place to eat for the luncheon that the team's going to do for Christmas. What are your thoughts there?
Technology moves so quick. I can't say, well, you're looking for a Wells Fargo email with slight misspellings in it. I can't tell people that anymore, right? I can't say, hey, you're looking for the Prince email with the bad English and all that. That doesn't count anymore. And I tell the people this, I tell people this is my family. I tell people that we work with. I've told people you and I work with. Does this feel right? Do I know this person? Am I expecting something from this person or organization? More importantly, am I expecting something from this person or organization right now?
Welcome, everyone, to State of Security Podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Hancock. Today, we're going to be talking about phishing and social engineering with our special guest, Clayton Smith. Hi, Clayton. How you doing?
Hey, doing well.
Good. Thanks for joining us today. Can you give us a little background, your experience, and why you think this is an important topic?
Well, I worked for an employer a few years ago, and they were attacked by ransomware, and that was my first real introduction to how serious it can become, and it can become serious very, very quickly, as in business ending. So from there, I kind of had an interest in it, and proceeded from there, and now I work for Access Point, doing that day to day.
Very cool. Very cool. So, as you've and we've talked before, there's so many in the industry today, so many ransomware attacks, so many cyber attacks begin with a phishing email sent to someone in the HVAC department, sent to a CIO secretary or staff assistant. So they're very easy to get suckered into, especially this time of year as the fall comes. There's going to be so many organizations that are trying to sell us stuff for Christmas and the holidays, which is crazy because it still feels like it's summer. But those are psychological points that where people get sucked into answering these phishing emails without looking at really what they're sending. So I think there's lots of issues in the industry with such a very simple tactic. Out of all the tactics bad actors can use, it's still a very simple tactic that works so many times, and the damage can be pretty huge, as you discussed. I mean, Sony in 2014, there was a variety of issues around that hack, and phishing was part of it. Yeah, yeah, phishing was part of that, but it wasn't the whole enchilada, so to speak. But there's so many examples that we can hit on. So I think there's some recommendations that we want to be able to hear from you as we go through this podcast, just to kind of get an idea of what you've seen and heard, especially recently. I know that there's been a lot of conversation going on about some of your projects and programs, and you've been involved in quite a bit. So I appreciate your time. So let's back up for a second. What really, you said earlier what got you into this and what you saw. Can you share a little bit more information around the ransomware encounter that you had?
So this was my first, I would say, first impactful encounter. You see it every day. Somebody calls you in, hey, can you look at this email? Can you check out this? Can you check out that? But this was really the first impactful. Woke up one morning, alerts going off everywhere, people screaming, hair on fire, the whole bit. And if anybody remembers, and the funny thing is, this was really only a couple of years ago. It was the Ryuk malware. Um, had really started taking apart a lot of the infrastructure, that we had, locking things. It's a very stressful day, but we did have a good program. We had come up with a contingency plan, and at the end of the day, we lost nothing. We lost some time. We lost 8 hours. Now, in terms of business, it was a lot of money in terms of business downtime. But when you talk about what did you actually lose and what was not recoverable, and that was nothing. And that's due to the good planning that the company had that I credit myself a little bit with. But I also was working with an excellent group of people who were aware of this. We did have a good program. So when we were hit, we had a plan, and that got me interested in it. Kind of loved it ever since. So I spend my time researching it. I work with it on a day-to-day basis, and I try to make sure it doesn't happen again, at least to the folks we work with.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. So do you think, oh, actually, let me ask you a different question. What have you experienced? Like people trying to fish you?
Oh Lord, I'm an IT professional, so we tend to be juicy targets. We also tend to have publicly available information, so absolutely.
Yeah.
Most of the time, it tends to be really just your basic consumer stuff, though. I haven't seen, to me personally, anything hyper targeted because when you think about the email guy, I'm kind of a nobody. I'm in the background. And I try to keep a low profile. I think that's a wise thing to do for IT professionals. Um, but I've just really seen the consumer stuff. The hey, click this link. Hey, here's a fake SharePoint link. People love to send me fake FedEx SMS messages. I think like everybody's seen. Uh, I just ignore all of it. I try not to interact with it.
Yep. Yep. I agree. I agree. I think the application of phishing is not just, as you quickly mentioned there, not just via email, right? You can still get that through, phishing, phone, through SMS, through whatever the platforms are. And I think that's people forget that sometimes. They think it's just via your email. So I think there's a lot to be said when you get a strange email or communication, let's say, from somebody claiming that they're a professional and this, that, or the other, and they need your banking data to do this or that. It's a bit comical to me nowadays because the ones I get, and you see right through it. You're thinking, wow, this is crazy. How these people are actually falling for this? So
Well, you do.
yeah,
You're a
yeah,
professional. You
exactly.
see right through it.
And that's the challenge is folks like in our field, and this is kind of the psychological piece, helping people understand how to mentally look at the situation. And then technically, what do you do? How do you respond? How do you get through it? How do you manage that piece? Right. So that's a challenge, I'm sure. So have you seen phishing get more advanced? Like social engineering components, or
Yes.
how does that intersect to you? How have you seen that?
It's an interesting thing because all of phishing and all of this stuff is really a variation on just every scam that's always existed. It preys on these little bits of our psychology. Um, but the tools have gotten better. In 1960, you may have gotten a piece of mail that looked legitimate. It took a lot of effort to put that out, but now it's gotten so advanced, even getting into email. Um, and just now in the last, I would say, 2 years with large language models and such, but it's gotten so much more advanced, so much more targeted, and honestly, the ability to generate really, really scary content, just preying on that human emotion. Um, it's gotten a lot worse, I would say, and it's gotten a lot more difficult on the untrained individual side to really sort a lot of that out. Um, the tools have gotten better. It is a cat and mouse game,
Yeah.
but it is more difficult, I think, for users, for individuals, for grandma sitting at home to sort all of this out. And that's really where you have a big problem, right? It's grandma calling on a weekend. I sent, or grandma sent $5,000 in Apple gift cards.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Right. So
But it has gotten a lot worse, a lot more complicated, a lot more technically sophisticated.
yeah, I think there was the Apple gift cards just hit a memory for me recently, like within 2 weeks. I live in a part of the country where, let's just say, there's a lot of politics, a lot of things going on a regular basis, some level of crime to some degree. Anyway, that to be said, it is considered a bedroom community from DC, Washington DC. So it's not too far from DC. Just a couple of weeks ago, I got this urgent phone call from the local sheriff's department saying that I need to call this number so that I can get out of some kind of what was it? Uh, Call to be on a jury or something or other, and if I could pay them, I'd get out of it or whatever. And it was a recording on my phone, and I had to chuckle. It sounded legit. There was a recording of a sheriff's office voice, his name. He was very professional, and it was a voice. They left a voicemail, and I need to call this number right away. But to your point, it's not phishing per se, but it's that same methodology. It's that same perspective, preying on emotions, and it's complicated, right? It's different than just sending an email. That was coordinated effort
It's
via
easy.
phone call, right? So it's interesting how bad guys are using that more and more. What do you think makes it such a powerful tool for criminals?
Again, going back to it's variations on the same scam that we've
Mm,
seen, I think, since humans have existed, right? We are social creatures. We want to be helpful. We want to respond to urgent communications from others in our group. And we want to stay out of trouble. We want to kind of do what's required of us to go about our day. These are things that reach down deep for people. And so, again, going back to just your average untrained person, it hits right there in the base of their brain. And a lot of things, a lot of your higher functions turn off. And so, training people to disregard that, it's very difficult. It is very difficult. Um, but yeah, some of these we get into, I think, will be a little more illuminating, but it's a huge problem.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Agreed. I think there's things of CEO impersonating CEO emails, and as you said, people who are acting on emotion, right? If you get an email from your CEO, hey, I need this done, hey, I need that done, et cetera, et cetera. Um, you're bound. Again, oh my gosh, I need to get this taken care of, right? This, and within our other organizations that we've both been in, these things have happened, and we've seen it firsthand. So to your point, right, it's that it's still preying on that emotion thing, and a considerable amount of social engineering, because there's always some research that has to get done to some degree when the bad guys want to send out these campaigns. It's not years and years ago, just give me an email list of people and I'll just send the same email to 5,000 people and maybe somebody will get hit. Nowadays, it's a bit more structured, purposeful. There's more intent behind it, which I find interesting to see, but it definitely makes it harder. So
It does. It
interesting.
does.
Yep, yep. So
Um,
different types of phishing attacks. What do you think about those? What have you seen?
I've seen so many. Honestly, we could sit here and spend the next hour just listing off the different ones. Really, what we're seeing is phishing themes that you're familiar with. Your bank, your CEO, your grandma, even with whatever publicly available information, your OSINT, as they call it, that you can get. Um, the big one is still that sense of urgency around maybe a bank. Hey, your account's going to be closed. You need to reset your password, or we're going to, close your account and whatever account that may be. All preying on that sense of urgency, that desire not to get in trouble, um, things like that. And I think where we really get into the complexity now in 2024 is the ability to really, really micro target that to where it's not, hey, here's this banking theme I'm gonna send out. To your point, I'm just gonna send out an email. And not only is it filling in easy information like you would do from MailChimp or Constant Contact, it is using scripting. It's using AI. I hate using that word, but it's
Yeah.
using a large language model to really pick up on all this information, these little breadcrumbs that they've picked up on the internet, and create a very convincing email that transcends that idea of like a theme
Hmm.
and is really customized to each recipient. And so it's incredibly difficult to combat. But it's all variations on the themes you've seen, but it's just heavily customized, and I think that's really where one of our bigger threats right now lies.
Yeah, yeah. So would you how would you combat that? Clearly, awareness campaigns are great,
Mhm.
but it's not ever going to be at the top of mind of everybody all the time. So
No, and it
from
can't be.
yeah, exactly. From a technical point of view, how have you seen um, any of these things be a solution to avoiding phishing, identifying phishing, let alone stopping it?
You hmm, you split things there. So there's an individual. Like, let's go back to grandma, right? There's the individual. Grandma should kind of have a qualified professional set her up and just kind of work as best she can. A patched computer, just let the Windows updates run, have Defender running. And I know I'm mentioning specific tools, but those real basics. Um, but at a more baseline level, people can't be experts on identifying phishing. That moves too quickly,
Mm,
right? What you see today is, it's not a huge effort or not a huge value tomorrow beyond what you would say is just, does it make sense? Is this person being skeptical? And that's the big thing is you always have to be skeptical. But for an individual, It's just following these basic guidelines about Defender and patching and things like that. Um, Now, on an organizational level, like you say, awareness campaigns, doing your phishing training. And I see a lot of people do phishing training wrong, and I could sit there and rant about that for 30 minutes. But making sure that's a positive experience, making sure it's a learning experience. But at the
Sure.
end of the day, you can't expect the intern in accounting to spend 8 hours being a phishing expert. So that's where you get into your good tools, your comprehensive observability, your comprehensive security program. So there's a whole other set of things that you do at an organizational level. And I know that people on the business side who might be watching this are like, okay, go spend $5 million. Not necessarily. At the organizational level, it's really about identifying risk. It's about, who are your vulnerable people, and putting those training dollars, that those training time where it counts, and that gets a whole into the weeds with the organizational level. But for the individual, the basics, do you have to interact with this email? You don't have
Yep.
to go click on every email that comes in your inbox, right? One of the things I really recommend to people at the business, at the organizational level, the individual level, is you get an email from your power company. You don't have to click that link. It's 2024. You've probably got an app on your phone. Open the app and do everything from there. You don't have to trust everything that comes in.
Yep. Yep.
Email's an alert. Email will tell you, hey, this might need your attention, but you don't have to interact with every piece of content. And I think that's just starting there. Starting there, you wipe out 80% of phishing.
Yeah. 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 I think the challenge is when you get an email in your inbox, there's a dopamine hit. Oh my
Mm-hmm.
gosh, somebody wants something. Click, 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 and that's why people get lost in email, right? Um, I've had to pretty much segment my time throughout the day to when I can check email, because if I don't,
Mm-hmm.
I'm checking it all the time. So I think that preys on that humans need to like keep clicking away. But what have you seen go wrong? Like you said, you can talk for 30 minutes on just what you've seen fail. Can you give us an example of what to look
Oh
out for?
man, you talk about failures at an individual level, and that is living in the age of social media. Like you said, it's that dopamine hit. It's that, well, I want to take care of this right now. Uh, People have a tendency to do that, and that's something that's very hard to tackle. People fail at that. They click a link that it probably looks very, very good or very, very close.
Mm-hmm.
People aren't dumb generally. They will look at something and say, "Yeah, this looks right," but they're not really paying attention. They click it, fail, done. And people also, I'm surprised in 2024 this really is still a thing. They'll reflexively log into almost anything, you know. So something pops up. They will reflexively put in their credentials, and there you go. There you have a breach. And in consumer level phishing, that's it. That's the golden thing they're after. They don't really care about your computer. Ransomware is a thing, but it's more at the organizational level.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Getting those credentials, getting those banking credentials, anything that gives that attacker information to continue that attack chain is super valuable. So people just are impulsive, and it's really hard to train around. So that's why I just say, hey, if you don't have to interact with it, don't.
Don't.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed. Agreed. So at an enterprise level, right, you can see the from a phishing perspective, you've got the training of the security awareness training of what to look for is one thing. You've got tools who can help from a operational perspective. I've got to manage this tool set, and I've got to make sure that when phishing comes in, I can stop it from a technical level. But then on the third leg of that is things like at the enterprise level, enterprise risk level. So who in the organization could be targeted, and so who needs more training than others? And a lot of organizations that you and I've seen kind of spread peanut butter security awareness training across everybody about evenly as possible, versus saying, okay, wait a second. The guy who works on our elevator is probably not going to get a phishing email because he doesn't touch anything. But the administrator, the secretary, the assistant to the CFO or the chief legal counsel might be a better target. So I should probably maybe flex my training a little bit and how it's applied. What are your thoughts on that?
That's pretty spot on. And a lot of organizations really, really struggle with that because, you're going back to your risk levels, and that ties back into how valuable is someone's time. The CEO's time is extremely valuable. You're not going to get him into an hour long session, but you have to find other ways to address that risk, associated with that person. Um, a lot of organizations fall prey to that political level consideration where they don't want to aggravate somebody. They don't want to train those higher levels. But you have to, and that's part
Mm.
of forming a comprehensive program. Now, we all have to work in the real world, right? So, at the, in identifying that risk, you say, okay, what is the rest of my team looking at? Well, it looks like the CEO is getting this type of email or that type of email. Um, who needs to talk to the CEO? Can we put the CEO in a sandbox where
Yeah.
only certain things get in and out? I mean, there's so many ways of really putting your time where it matters. And just to go back to your peanut butter analogy, a lot of organizations do that. They go and like, okay, everybody's covered. Well, right here over the CFO, there's a gap in that peanut butter, and somebody's just right in. Um, it, and it gets into the weeds really quickly, right, with those enterprise risk programs. But really knowing your organization, knowing your risks, knowing who you talk to, especially with email, right? Do you really need to get email from this random Gmail account that you've never heard of or never seen before? Um, that all is part of building out that comprehensive program. It's a lot of work. I mean, a lot of organizations simply don't have the time, don't have the money, don't have the people.
Yeah.
It's a
Agreed.
huge task.
Agreed. So, what do you think about? I know you've had this experience, so I'm kind of baiting it a little bit. Uh, but organizations who executives don't have monitored, registered devices, but they're still touching the network, or executives or junior executives who still want access to corporate information on their phone at all the times of the day, and they're logging onto systems, and let's just say cybersecurity hygiene could be questionable or improved. um, have you how have you managed through that? I mean, because I'm thinking our audience are CISOs and CIOs and IT directors and cybersecurity operators, right? So, and there's a question there of they come up against you bump against that wall, like, okay, Mr. Executive, we get it. You're special in the company and you're a bigger target than anybody else. So what are you going to do? Right.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of ways to manage risk. You have your tools, you have your teams. Sometimes you run up against a risk and you say, well, this person brings in millions and millions of dollars for the business. There's probably not a lot we can do about their hygiene, so we're going to accept this risk. I mean, that's at the baseline level. That is something you can do as an
Mm-hmm.
organization. Is it wise? Maybe, maybe not. Depends on your risk profile. But on the flip side of that, you can turn on heightened monitoring for the things you can see. You can understand what's going out to that unmanaged device from the corporate estate. And so if there is an issue, you have an understanding of what your exposure is. Did this person exfiltrate a bunch of HR data? Were they simply sending themselves reminders? There's a lot of ways to manage those little bits and pieces of risk without completely shutting down, quote unquote, super important person. Is it still something you should push for to get their cooperation to make it a win-win? Absolutely. But there's a million different ways to manage risk. At the fundamental level, you acknowledge it, you understand it, you wrap your head around it, what risk this person poses, and you make sure everybody in your organization who's relevant is aware of that risk and what could happen. And I mean, there's a little cover your butt, right? You get
Yeah,
everybody to sign
sure.
off on it, so
Sure.
everybody knows. And then you say, okay, well, how do we put this person on an on ramp, slowly getting them better, little bits and pieces, baby steps at a time. If you're talking about the CEO, start with their assistant. Start with the people around them.
Yep.
So again, you have that awareness of what they may have on them, what they may be exposing. So when you do have an incident, you're not chasing your tail. You're okay, we know he has this, this, and this. How much does this matter? And you can really conduct a much better assessment with that awareness.
Yep. Yep. I agree. That's a really good advice. I think it's important to understand, and like you said, the understand what data is leaving your real estate, right?
Yeah,
What
strong DLP
emails,
program.
right? Exactly. What content, emails, attachments are exiting, being filtered or sent through the system, and how people are responding. I think that just brings to memory a banking CEO organization in Seattle. They took their executives on a retreat for a week to plan out for the following year, and they took them to Alaska, I believe. So everybody was in Alaska on this week-long review of whatever that this bank was planning on doing, and the CFO gets a very urgent email saying, "Hey, we need to move $1.4 million from this account to that account to help sell this or buy this, whatever." CFO is running around in the middle of this event, very busy, very busy. Gets this email. Oh my gosh, I better do this. Doesn't look at it. Doesn't confirm anything with anybody. Approves it. Sends it off. Money leaves the bank. 2 days later, they realize, oh, wait a second, how did this leave? How did this happen? Where did this go? It was a great example. Everybody, to my knowledge at the time, this was a couple of years ago now, still kept their jobs, but it was an amazing awareness within the organization of, okay, you have to look at your awareness campaign, again, as you pointed out, not just the same amount of training for everybody, because not everybody's going to be targeted the same. So you're going to have to, the CISO, the CIO is going to have to look at it more objectively and risk matrix wise. How am I going to manage this if it goes sideways? And who would be most targeted and why? And who has the biggest risk? Who has something to lose? As you point out, right? It's very much who has access to important information in the company that could actually somebody would want to get. The janitor probably not. Again, the administrator probably, right? The assistant or whatever. So I think those are some key points from a foundational perspective that are important to keep in mind. So what have you mentioned that example earlier of a phishing attack happened and you guys got everything back up and running. What was that like? What was the response like from your side? Like, so
Terrifying.
if it happens to one of our listeners, what did you do? What did your team do to make sure things were okay, so you didn't lose anything?
I think in that incident, it's really important to understand that the response to that didn't start that day. The response to that started weeks and months prior.
Good point.
If you're running around day of, you've got workstations getting locked. If you have an on-prem network, you've got DCs getting, locked up. You're already behind. So prep for that really does begin ahead of time. If you don't have a plan, well, okay, we'll get into that, but you really should. So from an organization, leadership standpoint, even if it's at a very basic level, okay, how do we press the off button? Start there. But what we did was, number one was we took a deep breath and said, okay, what is our exposure here? Fortunately with Ryuk, Ryuk was not stealthy. Ryuk was not quiet.
Right.
So we knew exactly where it was at. But what we did was, going back to that off button, we had an off button. We knew how to break all the sites apart. The ones that were healthy, we broke them out so they couldn't talk to anybody else. We suggested everyone immediately shut down their computer. Now, this was with Riot, so the game's changed a lot the past couple of
Yeah.
years.
Yeah. Good point.
So that may not be the best advice anymore. It depends on what you're experiencing. And again, that goes back to having a plan. But at a basic level, you stop the damage, right? You say, okay, we're going to break everything apart. We're going to shut down our infrastructure. And if you're talking about stuff in the cloud, well, I hope you've got backups. If you don't
Yeah.
have backups, you don't have backups going back quite some period of time. Like, you have your dailies, you have your weeklies, you have your monthlies. You're already behind again. But tear it all down. Have a plan to break it apart. Um, Keep your head about you. You're going to have folks coming in. Hey, what are we doing? Okay, we're panicking. Business can't work. I think really from an IT leadership perspective, and I wasn't the IT leader in this particular incident, but I was leading the incident. I was very lucky that the person I was working for was very calm. They were very reassuring, and working with the business leadership is such a key thing. Set the expectations. Hey, we're going to be down for a while. No, there's nothing we can do about it.
Right. Right.
You know, you're going to have people like that. When can I turn everything back on? When can I get back to work? Well, as soon as we're done. And so managing those expectations is a key thing. Having a calm person to manage those expectations is a key thing. But I really can't stress enough that running around with your head on fire is not going to help anybody. You have to keep calm. You have to know your infrastructure, how to tear it down, how to put it back up, and where your backups are. And you've been testing your backups, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
But that's it. It just really is so important to be calm in those situations. Be calm, communicate well, communicate clearly.
Okay, that's cool. That's a piece of the puzzle that people don't realize till after the fact, typically. When you're sitting in a room with your executives, and sometimes the CISOs are doing that for the first time, and it's their first experience sitting down across the table from the CEO or the board, and they've got to answer, okay, why did this happen? And your answer is, well, we got phished. Well, the board may not understand
It's
what that
hard.
means, right?
Yeah,
First of all, but being able to explain it and have to your point, have someone there who's got the wherewithal to have that peace and patience and be able to communicate clearly and articulately in business terms. And to your great points, when's it going to be up? When we're done. Can't answer any faster than that. We got to finish our work first, then we'll let you know. Um, and I think that's definitely a key point. And your other points I think are spot on as well. The understanding and the educational piece, and then taking the educational piece and sorting it by highest risk factor in your organization. CEO needs extra, janitor not so much, right? And sorting the message to them, but then monitoring that middle piece of monitoring who's in the real estate, who's sending things in and out. I think that's, to your point again, I think it's very key. Um, and I think the policy and procedure that I think you've touched on a few times, um, phishing training, responding to phishing training or phishing situations or breaches, having that policy and procedure process. Make sure your steps are in order. You start yesterday, not tomorrow, to get it done. And those are key, really good examples, I think. So, if what other as we close out our episode here, what other examples do you think, or not examples as much as recommendations, ideas, or thoughts that you have that will help the listener, help folks understand catching phishing at this time, right? It's end of 2024, beginning of 2025. Budgets are being set for next year. IT budgets and security budgets are being set for next year at the same time. So CIOs and CISOs need to account for how important is phishing training. So that's one thing. The second thing is it's the holidays, and what better time to send out JCPenney coupons or Kmart coupons, if Kmart's still around, via email to your grandmother, to your mother, to your spouse, to your kids,
hmm
and have them click on
every
something,
day.
and it kind of hoses you up, right? Or your administrator who's looking for a good coupon and a place to eat for the luncheon that the team's going to do for Christmas, right? So what are your thoughts there?
Really, because technology moves so quick, right? I can't say, well, you're looking for a Wells Fargo email with slight misspellings in it. I can't tell people that anymore, right? I can't say, hey, you're looking for the Prince email with the bad English and all that. That doesn't count anymore. Um, what I will tell people, and I tell people this my family, I tell people this that we work with, I've told people you and I work with. Does this feel right? Is this something? Do I know this person?
Mm,
Am I expecting something from this person or organization? More importantly, am I expecting something from this person or organization right now? So you can kind of say, well, okay, maybe I'm expecting a coupon from Barnes and Noble, but you still really shouldn't click a link for that. If it's a coupon for Barnes and Noble, it's probably going to have some kind of redemption code or whatever. This follows many vendors. You shouldn't have to click a link and log in with your Microsoft credentials.
right.
That should be a big red flag. Um, you really just don't want to interact with it. Interact as little as possible. I got to say. And another big one is when you're evaluating an email that's maybe a little more personal. It's one of those really scary ones. It comes in. We call them extortion emails.
Mhm.
I say if somebody came up to you on the street and said this to your face, would you give this person a time of day, right? Or does this
Good
sound
point.
completely crazy? And so when especially to a non-technical person, you reframe that in that person to person, it puts a lot better context on it than, well, but what if it's legitimate? Okay, if somebody came up to you, what does that sound like to you? And I think that really helps people reframe that conversation and stay out of trouble.
That's a great example. That's a really great example, right? Thinking of it, pausing, and then saying, okay, like you said, if this is a conversation on the street, how would this turn out? Right?
Yeah.
Is this normal? Yeah, that's a good point. That's a very good point. Well, this has been great. I really appreciate it. I think more to come from you, I'm sure. This won't be the last time you're on the podcast, or the second time you're on the podcast. So I'm sure there'll be more. Appreciate it again. Thanks for coming on.
Okay.
And we'll follow up more on this fall regarding some other social engineering tactics and parts and pieces that we think our audience needs to hear. Thank you, everyone, for listening today. If you have any questions, please reach out to us. It's at Access Point Consulting. Again, this is Jeff Hancock and Clayton Smith talking today from the State of Security podcast. Have a good day.